Hello and welcome to my 3D in Spine tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to rig and animate a coin like this with a 3D illusion. These rigs are actually deceptively simple once you know the principles behind it. First, I'm going to start with just the artwork. I'm only going to be working off of these three assets. And one thing to consider with the assets is that the artwork needs to have a little bit of extra space around the edge, not just a thin line, but a thicker line. This will account for vertices when it comes to meshing the object. To begin, I'm just going to show you the basic principle at play with this rig. So I'm going to bring in the coin face asset. I'm going to duplicate it and offset them. Now I've got them positioned, I just need to take the two bones that these coins are sitting on and scale them down vertically. And as you can see, this is giving the illusion of it flipping and rotating. Now onto constructing the rig. We're going to take one of the faces and generate many mesh points. We want enough mesh points to create a good round shape and not have it looking too polygonal. Now I'm going to take each of these outer vertices and drag it into that buffer zone I mentioned before in the artwork. We want each of the edges between the vertices to line up within that, and we don't want any triangles of alpha poking through. This is important when it comes to lining up this asset with the side coin asset. If you have any of these little triangles of alpha around the coin, it's basically going to make little gaps in the rig, and we want to keep everything as solid and as 3D and real looking as we can. I've just jumped ahead a little bit there to having the coin face completely meshed around the edge, and now I'm just going to get rid of the additional mesh points I generated on the inside. We don't need any extra mesh points that aren't going to be used, and we only need the ones around the edges. And I do like to have just one in the very center. I haven't had any distortion problems in the past, but this will basically mean that any distortion is taken into those sort of segment shapes instead of into jagged lines zigzagging up and down the mesh points. And it means the artwork can stay a little bit more consistent. And here I'm just checking that there is no alpha space around the edge of the coin and adjusting where there is. With the first coin face meshed, we can move on to creating the side of the coin. This artwork is just a rectangle, as all of the shape will be created in this meshing and rigging stage. So now we've got that, I'm just going to duplicate that already meshed coin face and offset it slightly into the position I want it to be in. And we can start lining up the side of the coin now. To do this, we're going to count the vertices on the bottom half of the coin face and have that number match the amount of vertices on the top and bottom of the side coin rectangle. So I'm going to generate those vertices and just count them to make sure I've got the right number. And it is also important for this piece of artwork that there is no alpha showing around the art. We're going to bring the vertices down into the artwork again. And again, this is just to make the rig cleaner. It's going to make it look much more like an actual object once these vertices are lined up with each other. And to do that, we essentially copy the vertice from the coin face and paste that position onto the vertice of the coin side, just selecting that vertice target and pasting it onto the vertice that we want it to line up with. This is where not having any alpha surrounding the artwork really helps. If you had the vertices just around the shape and not in the shape, you would really see gaps in between these two assets here. And I'm just going to go through and make sure I'm not seeing any of those gaps. And here I do see one, so I'm just going to make a minor adjustment. So I'm going to edit the vertice position on the coin face, and that's going to be an edit mesh, so I'm not just moving the art. Copy the vertice position and paste it onto the coin side. Now that I have lined up the top side of the coin with the top face of the coin, I'm going to line up the bottom side of the coin with the bottom face of the coin. Proper tongue twister. So I'm just making sure that everything is in the position I want it to be, and I'm going to adjust the opacity of the side just to make things a little bit clearer for me, because things can get a little bit confusing once things are overlapping at this point. But the principle is the same. We're just copy and pasting the vertices to make sure that it lines up with the bottom face of the coin this time. I'm just speeding it up here to save you some of the tedium. But now that that is complete, you can really see how the coin is coming together, how it actually looks like a 3D object now. I am noticing at this point that the artwork is a little bit too bright and maybe the lines are a little bit too close together, so I'm just going to go and edit that. It's always worth editing the artwork to the rig, even during the rigging process. It always comes out with a better result. And now you can see I've edited the art and I think it's looking a lot more cohesive. And now that I'm happy with the artwork and the meshing, it's time to move on to the rigging stage. So quickly to explain how I've laid out the skeleton, this central bone is the coin root, an additional root under the main master bone. Everything I'm rigging is contained within this bone. This bone that's set slightly above the root bone is the coin face 1 bone. This is what the upper coin face will be weighed to. You can place the artwork for the upper coin face in this bone, but I prefer to do that with weighing. And this lower down bone is the coin face 2 bone. This is what the coin face that is lower and behind the upper coin face will be weighed to. So these 2 coin face bones will be controlling the vertical scale and therefore rotation of the coin. All of the art assets will be rigged to these 2 bones. And again, you could have the coin faces placed in their corresponding bones, but I prefer to have them controlled with weights. I'm going to start by binding all of the assets to the bones that will be controlling their movement. So the coin side will be bound to both coin face 1 and 2, and then the 2 coin faces will be bound to their corresponding coin face bones. Now when it comes to actually weighing the coin side, we can see here, now that they're colour coded, which of these 2 bones is on top and which is below. And we're just going to select all of the vertices that line up with the lower coin face and have them controlled by the coin face 2 bone. And now that the side is rigged, we can select those 2 coin face bones and scale them down vertically. And you can see the side of the coin following that scaling motion, and you can really see how the 3D look of this coin is coming along. Now we're going to go ahead and duplicate that coin side so that we can have it on the other side for when the coin is rotating fully or just rotating in the other direction. We want to have the coin side filling in the other half of the coin. And I'm just going to remove the weights on this asset for now, and repeat the steps that I took with the other side of the coin, just making sure that each vertex lines up. I'm sure that the coin isn't exactly symmetrical, so there will be some alteration to do, but at this stage it's a little bit easier because all of the vertices are much closer to their target position. So I just copy paste, same as before, and then I'm going to go ahead and reweigh it to make sure that the correct edge is following the correct bone. Now you can see if we adjust the position of the lower bone a little higher, you can see that when I rotate these 2 bones, we've got the other side ready to go for a full rotation, or if you're just changing the perspective on the bone to see the top edge instead of the bottom edge. The next step with this rig is to add constraints. You can animate without them, just using the 2 face bones, but you'll have to have a duplicate animation for each bone, and this can make tweaking a bit difficult, so I prefer to work with constraints. We're going to create 1 bone alongside the other 2 face bones. We don't want it to be the parent or the child of the face bones, as this can affect the behaviour of the constraint. I like to have this bone set to the side of the coin so that I'm not accidentally clicking on other bones when I'm trying to animate with this one, and I'm going to name it Flip Control. Now that that's set up, we can take the 2 face bones and transform constraint them to the flip control bone being the target. Now in the constraint settings, I'm going to set the scale control up to 100. I do both directions because I can't remember which is which, but we're only going to animate in this vertical scale, and you can see that the constraint is successfully controlling both of the bones in unison. The final stage of rigging this coin is the last control, which is the depth control. I'm going to create a new bone for that. And basically, this is another situation where you could be animating just with the 2 coin face bones, but it can get a little muddled in animation if it comes to rotating the coin and having those 2 directions for translation. It can be hard to keep things lined up the way they need to be. Having things controlled by this depth bone will basically allow the depth to be consistent no matter how you're moving the coin. For this control, we want 2 separate constraints for each face of the coin. So I'm going to start with the lower face of the coin, create a transform constraint, and select the depth control bone. Once this is set up, I'm going to go into the translate and make sure I'm selecting the right translate, because you can see here I do the wrong one. And I'm going to set that to -100. I'm working in the negative for this one because I want both coin faces to go in opposite directions when it comes to moving the depth control bone, so that it actually creates depth and doesn't just move them both at the same pace in the same direction. Notice when making translate constraints that it can often change the position of the initial bone. So if you're working to a specific art that needs to line up, you might need to offset this just to make sure it matches up. I'm going to do the same thing with the top face bone, except this one is obviously just going to be at 100 instead of -100. And again, I'm going to adjust the offset just to make sure the setup pose is what I want it to be. Now you can see as I adjust the vertical position of this depth control bone, I'm creating more depth and even showing the top edge of the coin instead of the bottom edge of the coin when I want to. I'm actually going to delete the constraint on the top face of the coin with this depth control because I prefer working with just one of the faces being controlled by the depth. I really encourage you to try this both ways, having both faces constrained, having just the top face or just the bottom face, and find which one you prefer for animating. And now we're on to animating. I'm going to be speeding up most of this because it was about 40 minutes flat out of me just animating away, and that would be really boring to watch. But I'll slow down for the main steps. Like here, I've just started with a bounce, just bouncing up off of the surface and then a little extra bounce as it lands. And I'm going to adjust the extra bounce because I kind of want it to sort of clatter back down onto the surface it's on, maybe sort of rotate a little bit. For most of the animating, it looks a bit odd at that stage, but you'll see it come together at the end. Here I'm adding a full 360 rotation to the coin. I want it to land in the same position it bounces up in. And I like having a little bit of rotation, so it's not just flipping, it's also spinning. It sort of adds a bit of an angle to the flip. It gives a lot more interest. But I'm just going to try and workshop that rotation a little bit before I get onto the actual flipping animation. So now I'm plotting down where the flip is going to start and end. That first key is where the coin lifts up off of the surface and the rotation will begin. And there I'm putting in the first flip. So I'm just bringing the vertical scale for that flip control bone to as close to 0 as I want it to be, and then stretching it back out to 1 in between before the next flip. And then I'm going to pop down the next flip there. I want it to flip twice in this animation so that logically the coin is landing back on the same face it started on. In actuality, we're only ever going to see that top face of the coin. The flip is more of a trick where we will play with that rotation, where you rotate it 180 degrees so it sort of carries on the other side. For now though, I'm going to start animating with the depth control. So when it's at its side here, we really want to increase the depth of the coin to make it look like it's revealing more of the side of the coin. And then again, bringing it back to that initial position when it's in the middle of the rotation, and back out, increasing the depth on the flip. And then I'm just going to play with it a little bit on the landing, which again looks a little bit wonky until we start playing with the position of the coin as it lands. Now that the depth of the coin keys are plotted out, I'm going to be finding the point where it flips and keying the rotation. I key twice, one frame after the other, and then I'm just going to pull up that rotation so that it's actually rotating 180 degrees in one frame. And that's going to make it look like it's carrying on the flip on the other side instead of just sort of nearly flipping, getting to the apex of the flip and sort of unflipping itself. This way it looks like the flip is continuing to the other side. And now I'm just going to adjust the rotation at the end of the animation to make sure it's matching up with the beginning. I want the coin to finish at 0 degrees of rotation at the end. And now I'm just going to adjust these back-to-back keys from a tween key to a jump ahead key. So Spine isn't going to be interpreting a tween for a single frame. You don't need that, and it can often end with little bugs where Spine is trying to put an in-between there where it doesn't need to have one. And now I'm adding back-to-back translate keys just to try and get that flip to line up as best I can and try and get it looking as smooth as possible. And I'll do the same thing with these keys, making sure that they're jump ahead keys and not tweens. Now what I'd like to do is, in between the two flips, adjust the angle of the coin so you can see the top edge of the coin side instead of the bottom edge of the coin side with the depth controller. And what I'd like to do is have it switching from one side to the other at the point that the face is fully facing the camera at full 1:1 scale. This way it'll sort of look like it's arching as it's going from flipping on one side to flipping on the other side. You can see that working quite well here, but you can also see it trying to switch back to the other side again. So I'm adjusting the depth control there so that it matches on the second flip and then goes back into the first position as it lands. I'm just slowing down here because you're probably seeing the two coin sides overlapping each other a bit. And you just need to turn off the coin side, which is now hidden and underneath the other, even though in the draw order it's on top. So it's going to have a little bit of overlap and a bit of artifacting. We just need to turn that off once you start noticing the overlapping, and then make sure to turn it back on later in the animation when you notice that it's starting to look a bit 2D and there's a coin side missing, like there. And now I'm animating the land, where we had that bounce and that sort of squishy rotation. Now we can adjust the translate keys and have it bounce down on its bottom edge, jump up and land onto its top edge, and then sort of flop down. This is really sold with the position keys to make it look like it's landing down on a physical surface. And this is how our animation is looking so far. I am noticing just where it's flipping there are some jumps, and I'm also thinking it's quite slow. So I'm going to speed it up and I'm going to adjust the position at the flip points just to try and get it looking as smooth as I can. But it actually took me some time to figure out what was causing that jump, so I'm going to jump ahead to that. As you can see, where the flip control is lining up with those two back-to-back keys in the coin root, it was lined up with that first key, which was causing the jump. But lining it up with the second key in those two back-to-back keys makes it look a lot smoother. It's really interesting to me how little changes like that can make a huge difference in the end product of an animation. And now I'm going to be adding a glow, and I'm sorry that I must have skipped over adding this in the rigging stage, but essentially all that I did was duplicate the coin face and then rename the asset so it was switched out with an identical asset. That's only difference was it was a lot brighter. And this is on add mode, and all I'm doing now is just playing with the opacity so that it's nice and bright at the apex of the flip where the coin face is really face onto the camera, and then dimming it down while it's flipping side on and bringing it back up for the second flip. And I did the same thing with the coin sides, except these don't have a different asset. This is just the same asset duplicated and on add mode so that it's got a little bit of a shine there. And finally, I'm going to really speed through the last adjustments, playing with the curves and the speed and timing of the coin flip animation. This is very tedious, but really important to go in and just play around with your animation. Just make sure it is selling the movement as best as you can. That being said, you can absolutely just keep tweaking things forever. And this is where I decided my animation is finished. I am quite happy with it, and I think it looks really lovely. So that was it. That is my tutorial for rigging and animating a coin in Spine. I hope you guys really liked it and you learned something, and you can continue to refer to this video as you need to when you're experimenting with this yourself.